What happens after a global nuclear war? Fallout 4 presents a version of what could happen, but let's do some digging to see how likely it is. Now, I couldn't find the exact number of bombs dropped in the war, which is probably to be expected. I mean, if civilization was about to be destroyed, what kind of maniac would be sitting there, counting the number of nukes in the air?
George, what are you doing? The bombs are falling. We gotta get to the shelter. No, I gotta count the number of bombs. It's my job. Who cares? It's not like you'll get in trouble with your boss. The world's gonna end. How would you know that unless I count how many bombs there are? What if there are like 3 bombs? There's not. Look, I got this job because I wanted to do something important for this country. I've sat at this desk for 10 years doing nothing useful. Now is my chance.
Anyways, right now the US has 6,970 nukes and Russia has about 7,300. Since the war in Fallout happens in 2077, the number of nukes will probably grow by much more. Starting from the initial numbers for the US and Russia, I scientifically calculated the number of nukes launched and concluded that it will be a shit ton. This would certainly fuck up the Earth and cause civilization to collapse. So one question is, how long would the radiation last? Movies tell us that a nuke would irradiate the ground, making it uninhabitable for thousands of years. This is wrong. It's just a myth left over from the Cold War to scare ya. A useful myth maybe to prevent us from nuking each other. Just a month after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, people checked the radiation levels and found them to be super low. The Japanese didn't even evacuate afterwards because they didn't know about radiation poisoning. People just went on living, rebuilding their cities. What's messed up was that the Americans didn't even warn them about it. Dicks.
Sir, shouldn't we tell them to evacuate? No! It's a war, soldier. There ain't no warnings in war. Did my wife warn me before she left me for that homewrecker Raoul? Sir, I'm not sure how that's relevant. Shut up! Drop and give me $50. I have alimony to pay.
They soon regretted their decision.
Sir, because we didn't warn them to clean up the blast zone. The radiation birthed a monster that is now rampaging through town. Well, crap. What does this monster look like?
The Japanese just stayed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so you would expect them to develop all kinds of cancer or turn into the Fantastic Four or those leeches from the movie Attack of the Giant Leeches, right? Nope. The radiation caused only a tiny uptick of cancer among the survivors, and there were no birth complications in their kids that anyone could see. Now, the bombs dropped in Japan were air bursts. They exploded high up in the air and resulted in very little radioactivity. Ground bursts cause much more radioactive fallout because it irradiates the dirt and disperses that radioactive dust miles away from the blast zone. You know how a fart can start out small but quickly spread throughout the entire room? A ground burst is basically an asshole that farts radioactive dust into the atmosphere. This study shows how much radiation is generated by a ground burst of a small nuclear bomb. From this, we can extrapolate the radiation levels over time. There's some math involved, but basically after 1 or 2 years, the radiation levels will go back to almost normal. It's also important to understand that the radioactivity drops real quickly at the beginning. After 2 days, the radioactivity has already dropped by 99%. That graph, incidentally, is also a graph of a man's sex drive after he came. And it's also a graph of a woman's sex drive after marriage. Now, wait a minute, what about Chernobyl, you may be asking? How come the area around Chernobyl is still uninhabitable? Well, I'm glad you asked, Padawan. A nuclear power plant has way more radioactive materials than a nuclear bomb. The Chernobyl disaster put 400 times more radioactive materials into the air than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. But, more importantly, there's a lot of misinformation about Chernobyl. The most prevalent is that the place will stay unsafe for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. I even saw the number 20,000 years floating around the internet. This is also wrong. Chernobyl is too large a topic to discuss in this video, but the gist is that the area around Chernobyl is currently livable. You get a larger dose of radiation from an X-ray than from walking around Chernobyl's exclusion zone. One inaccurate thing about the Fallout games is that everything looks like a desert wasteland. Fallout 4 happens around 200 years after the war. Where are all the plants and forests? Look at Chernobyl. Without humans ruining things for everyone, the plants and trees and animals have taken over and they're multiplying all over the place. They're like Priuses in San Francisco. The same thing would happen to plants and animals after a war wipes out most people on Earth. It'll be PETA's dream come true. Just kidding, PETA. So, let's recap. What happens after a global nuclear war? Civilization collapses. The surface is safe to recolonize after a few years. And nature will reclaim most of the land.